You're watching the first lesson on body systems. This unit will cover how our bodies work and the different parts of our bodies and their functions and what special features they have in order to be able to do the things they do that keep us alive. We'll be talking about how different cells in our body sort of change and become what they need to be in order to sustain multicellular life. So, we're going to talk about cell specialization in this topic. So, we'd like to start off with what is a cell? Well, cells are what all life is made out of. All life, if it is alive, is made out of a cell. There's no living thing that we know of that isn't made of something that we can call a cell. So, all life is made of cells. A living thing, so to call something alive, it needs to be at least one cell. It can be many cells put together, but to call something alive, it needs to be made up of at least one cell. So a living thing can only be made of one cell or many cells. It can't be made of anything else. So all life, when life first showed up, first evolved, first developed, all life started out as one cell. All life started out as a single cellular thing, right? So here we have a picture of, I think, a protozoan. Uh, Basically, this is a living thing that is only made out of one cell. Well, life existed like this for billions of years, with a B, billions of years. So why did life then become multicellular, right? As you know, we are made of many, many, many cells. So life started out as one cell, and then over billions of years decided, well, not decided, but developed into something or things that were made of many cells. So why become multicellular if singular cellular being single cellular worked out for such a long time? Why would you want to become multicellular? So this video will discuss how life started to become multicellular. In a nutshell, single cellular things can only do so much. And as you add more cells, and as those cells do certain jobs, they become more efficient at those jobs. And so groups of cells will do one job, and another group of cells will do another job. And they'll be really efficient at it, they'll be really good at it. And so they could get bigger, and the clumps of cells could get larger. You could have more cells, and you could do more things, and you could travel even further. And so, in order to survive in harsher or more difficult environments, becoming multicellular could show an advantage because you have the opportunity to have different parts of you or different cells do different jobs and become really good at them. So, as life developed, cells were able to survive easier when they grouped up. This also allowed different cells to take on different jobs. So, if we were to look in our body, we would see stem cells, bone cells, blood cells, muscle cells, fat cells, skin cells, nerve cells, endothelial cells, sex cells, pancreatic cells, and in those, when our cells tend to go awry, cancer cells. And so, in our own bodies, we would see all of these types of cells and all of these cells doing things. Now, um, cancer cells are the weird sort of group, of course, because they are part of a disease, but our bodies are constantly fighting cancer, right? When our cells divide, when we heal, our cells divide and sort of fill up the gaps or take the place of old cells. And every once in a while, a cell will make a mistake, and that can result in a cancer cell being made, and then our body fights that off. But that's an aside. So we would see most of these cells in our body, and they all do different jobs. They all take on different jobs and roles. And by doing this, each of these cells become really, really good at their one thing. So blood cells, and we're not going to include white blood cells in this one, we're going to look at the red blood cells. They're really good at moving oxygen and moving wastes around in our body so that our body gets the oxygen and our body doesn't get filled with waste. And they become really good at that. And so if we were single cells, our single cell life would have to be able to do certain jobs like move us around and transport nutrients and tell different parts of our body to do things and protect ourselves and reproduce and so on. And it would all have to do that in one cell. And so it's sort of that idea of jack of all trades, master of none. While in our bodies, we have all these different types of cells and they all do one thing. They're masters of one or maybe a few things. And so they're able to do those jobs much more efficiently. And so that's kind of why being multicellular helped living things survive, was because those different cells that grouped up, well, some of those cells were really good at one thing, so they did that one thing for the body, while other cells did other things. And that allowed that multicellular thing to survive better and potentially in harsher environments than single celled things. So when life was only made up of one cell, each individual cell had to do every single job, move, they eat, reproduce, all by themselves. So they all had to do all these jobs all at once at the same time. But when cells group up, they could do different jobs, they could take on different roles, and they could become really good at that one job or those few jobs. And so they can adapt, they can evolve, they can develop into certain roles that allow them to do that job even better. While being single cellular, you couldn't really adapt one way or the other too much, because if you adapted too much to moving, then you don't have enough room or not enough resources to reproduce. So your whole uh, lineage dies off, or if you put everything into reproduction, then you don't have enough resources to move or to get food. And so you can't, divide your resources as well because you have to do every job yourself. But when different cells do different jobs and they group together to survive, then those different cells can adapt and change and become even better at what they're supposed to do. And so they become more efficient and they become stronger and they become better. So when cells group up, when you have a group of cells doing the same job, you call that a tissue. You call that a tissue. So we have a picture of muscle tissue and the three different types of muscle tissue, right? You have cardiac means heart, muscle tissue. And then you have skeletal muscle tissue. And the reason why it's called skeletal muscle tissue is because these muscles attach to your bones or your skeleton. And then you have smooth muscle tissue, smooth because they're, well, smooth. And you find those in your soft internal organs, such as your stomach or your intestines. And so all of these, if you see these dots, these are muscle cells are odd because they don't look like circles, but they're kind of stretched out. They're kind of stretched out. And these are muscle cells. And each of these dots show you the nucleus of each cell. And we'll talk about that later on when we talk about cells themselves. But each of these dots represent a cell. And there are a bunch of cells doing the same job. Cardiac cells, cardiac muscle tissue, or cardiac muscle cells, they all help make the heart beat. Skeletal muscle cells help move your body, and smooth muscle cells help you move food around or certain things in your stomach and intestines around. And so these cells are working together to do the same job. So when you have a group of cells doing the same job, you call them a tissue. Cells and tissues each perform the same job, and together they increase the output. What I mean by output, I mean their efficiency. They're able to work better together, right? You couldn't lift a heavy weight if you didn't have all of these cells in your muscle tissues pulling together, right? You wouldn't be able to lift things, you wouldn't be able to move things if you only had one cell. One cell can't do a lot, but many cells can do so much. So more muscles work together in a tissue to lift heavy things or make the heart beat, because the heart is such a powerful muscle. And so if you only had one cell working as your heart, you wouldn't be able to push those liters upon liters of blood in your system. And so a bunch of cells working together makes a tissue, right? If these cells are working together to do the same job, then you say that they are a tissue. So when you have tissues that work together, so now you have cells and they work together and they do the same job, you call that a tissue. Well, what if you have a bunch of tissues doing the same job, right? So you have all these clumps of cells, they do the same job, and then you start adding those clumps upon other clumps of cells doing the same job. What do you call that, right? So tissues working together to do the same job, you make an organ, right? Here we have lungs, and you have lung tissue. And our lungs, hopefully you know, allow us to take in oxygen, allow us to exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. Well, one cell couldn't do that for a whole body. So we have lung tissues. We have tissues, we have cells grouped together doing the same job so that we can take in oxygen. Well, we have a bunch of those tissues working together in this sort of structure called our lungs. And those lungs are organs, right? So a bunch of tissues working together are called organs, right? Cells in the lungs are designed, I don't like the word designed, but I'm going to use it. The cells in the lungs are designed to transport oxygen. And these cells make lung tissues, which work together to collect oxygen. And as these tissues work together, you have the lungs, or the organ called the lungs, right? Or the organs called lungs, because you have two lungs. And so you have cells working together to make tissues, right? You have cells working together to make tissues. You have tissues working together to make organs, and lungs is an example of that. And then when you have organs working together to do the same job, you have an organ system, right? So if you have organs performing one job together, they create an organ system. An organ, oh, that was terrible. An organ system, right? An organ system. So here we have a picture of our digestive system, and we have different organs that are involved with this system. We have our our liver, our stomach, gallbladder, small intestines, large intestines, right? Our esophagus. All of these are different organs that work together to help us digest food, break food down, get energy from them. And so we call this an organ system because multiple organs are working together to break food down. So again, bunch of cells working together in our bodies is called a tissue. And again, if we go back to our organ system, if we look at one organ, our stomach, for example, our stomach has stomach cells, right? And those cells working together make stomach tissues. And those stomach tissues working together, those tissues working together, make organs. And so all those tissues, that stomach tissues made of stomach cells, make our stomach, right? That's one organ. But that stomach organ also works together with our liver, made up of liver tissue. Liver cells work together with our esophagus, which is made up of esophageal tissue, and esophageal cells, which work together with our small intestine and our large intestine, and etc., to make our organ systems. And so you can have different organs working together to do a job, and we call that an organ system. And each organ is made up of a bunch of tissues, right? And a tissue is a bunch of cells working together. And so that pretty much sums up our introduction to body systems, right? So you know that cells are the basic unit of life. Everything that is alive is made up of cells. And life started out as one cell, right? And as resources became more spread out, or whatever the reason may be, working together became more advantageous. So cells started working together, started clumping together, started becoming multicellular, multi meaning more than one, and cellular meaning cells. And so they became multicellular, where different cells did different jobs. And as they did that, those cells that did the same job, that worked together to do the same job, are called tissues. And the tissues that work together to do the same job are called organs. And the organs that do the same job, or at least help each other to do the same job, are called organ systems. So hopefully this was a good introduction, because now we're going to move on to the systems themselves. We're going to be talking about the the skeletal system. I want to say bone system, skeletal system, muscular system, digestive system, respiratory system, nervous system, etc. And we'll be talking about these systems, and you'll need to know the key organs and their functions. So see you next lesson.